Hi, everyone. This is Joelle Fawcett, and welcome to the Soul Method podcast.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.
Welcome back, everybody. Like I said, this is Joelle Fawcett, and I am your host and the founder of the Soul Method, where our mission is to be your guide to heal from the past, be at peace in the present, and create a future you love. And welcome to episode 11 of the Soul Method podcast, titled I Quit. Now, I'm not quitting the podcast or the Soul Method for that matter. So if any of you were worried about that, you can take that off of your plate. That is not what I'm talking about. However, I have been wanting to do this episode for quite a while. And this episode is all about choices. Now, recently, this whole topic came up for me because a few months ago, I made the choice to quit drinking alcohol. Hence the title, I Quit. Now, in the past, throughout the several past years of my life, I always, every few years, had taken a break from booze just to reset my system, detox a little bit, do the quote unquote healthy thing. And so the thought of taking a break wasn't new to me in any way. However, Spirit had been speaking to me for quite a while and pulling at me to quit drinking alcohol. And I could feel my alignment needing to click into that place. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about making choices in our lives in this episode. And if you're looking for support on how to make what might feel like challenging choices in your life, then you are in the right place, my friend. So this all happened back in March, and ironically, I chose to quit drinking on a Monday. And then that Friday, I wound up in the hospital with a kidney infection. So I'm throwing that out there just to say that just because you make choices that are in alignment with the path that is what you're called to do doesn't mean that it's always going to be sunshine and roses the minute that you step into it, right? I think we have this misconception that if you're on the right path, if you're in the right relationship, if you're living in the right house, whatever it is, that if you're doing these things, then, the clouds part, the gods sing, and magically everything falls into place. And the reality is that that's just simply not true. Sometimes when you make these challenging choices in your life, things get hard even more quickly than if you had avoided them. And sometimes that's a way to know that you are on the right path, because sometimes when you make these challenging choices, it creates space for things to come up for you that otherwise wouldn't have had the space to come up. So if things get more challenging for you, if you choose to make some choices that you've been waiting to make after listening to this episode, don't fret. Doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. And like I always say, I am here to support you in any way that you need. So back to my story back in March. It had been several months of Spirit speaking to me and my alignment pulling at me saying, hey, it's time. It's time. It's time. It's time to give it a break. It's time to quit. It's time to step away. And like most people, I think, I heard it and I said, yeah, well, maybe I'll just not drink on these days, or maybe I'll just drink less, or whatever it was. And I made those adjustments and it wasn't enough. Spirit was still speaking to me. My alignment was still pulling at me. I could tell that my alignment was off with these choices. And I knew that I was called to live a sober lifestyle specifically at this time in my life because I had gotten really committed to number one, the soul method, which I was starting and getting ready to launch just at the same time. And I also am very committed to the energy work and spirit work that I do. And spirit made it very clear to me that if I was going to walk down this path, then alcohol is something that I would need to give up in my life. Now, just because I knew all of this, just because I am very in tune with my alignment, just because I could hear spirit speaking to me, it doesn't mean that this choice was any easier for me than it would be for anybody else. And I was scared. I'm going to be really honest with you guys, like I always am. My ego was freaking out. That little voice in my head was losing her mind. Sushi said all the things to me every time I thought about making this choice. She was telling me that people would reject me, that what were people going to think? People would think that I had a problem with alcohol, that I secretly was getting drunk all the time, which I didn't. I've never had a problem with alcohol. I've never been addicted to that in any way. But I genuinely was afraid that that's what people would think if I decided to step away. And that's something that I do want to say in all of this is that you don't necessarily need to have a problem with something in order to quit, right? You don't need to be addicted to sugar to stop eating sugar. You don't need to be lazy and to be out of shape to up your fitness game. You don't need to be watching TV 24/7 to put more restrictions on your amount of screen time, right? I think often in our culture, we think in forms of extremes where if someone's going to stop doing something, it means that they've been doing too much of it, which simply isn't true. It just means that they're making a new choice and moving along a different path, right? So for you, if you're thinking about making some shifts or making some changes, don't go to that judgment place of, well, is it really a problem? So, like I was saying, sushi in my head, that little voice. If you don't know the story of sushi, you can go back and listen to episode 3 where I talk about the voice in my head and how I gave her a name. That's her name. um, but I genuinely was afraid. And all of these fear based beliefs I know were based on my ego, based on separation, and really weren't real. I knew that the people in my life who truly loved me wouldn't really care. And I was still scared. And you know what's funny at the time is that I actually didn't even consider that people would think that I was pregnant, which is pretty funny. It wasn't until about a month into this project and somebody said something to me. Let me see. We were out and some people asked me what I was drinking, and I said, "Oh, it's just club soda." For those of you who know me, you know that I love carbonation. I love bubbles. So I often drink club soda with like lemon and lime when we go out now. And this person basically asked me if I was glowing with the connection to being pregnant. And that's actually when it hit me. And I had to say, no, no, no. It wouldn't be a big deal if I was, but no, that's not the intention for me quitting drinking. So now, as I was going through this whole process and sharing it with people in my life, I realized that number one, based on people's reactions around me, most people do not know how to create change in their life. And number two, the reason why most people don't know how to create change in their life is because the change is based on a weighing scale of good or bad or right or wrong or based on judgment rather than based on an authentic alignment with yourself and what you're called to do, which shouldn't have any judgment attached to it at all. So, we're going to talk more about that in this episode. Now, I have to say that most people know when spirit is calling them or when their alignment is off. Like, you're a smart person, you're not dumb. You know when spirit is calling you or when the choices that you're making feel a little icky and that you need to do something else. Often we feel this the most when we step out of integrity. And this comes up a lot in the movies in our culture around not telling the truth, right? From a very early age, we see in entertainment how people are just called to be honest with their words because it feels so icky to not come clean, whether that's confessing your love to somebody, whether that's confessing to an action or confessing to something that you did to somebody else behind the scenes, right? In most movies, near the end, there's this moment where somebody will quote unquote come clean. And it usually is around the climax of the movie. And that moves to the resolution, whether it's a happy ending or not, that moves to the resolution of the story. And so we're very conditioned in our culture to this concept of being honest. However, most of the time when we see this in entertainment, it comes from a place where we feel forced, where the character in the movie feels forced to be honest because they just can't stand it any longer, versus a powerful place that is grounded and authentic. And it's much more enjoyable to make challenging choices from a grounded and authentic place rather than a place where you've denied your authenticity for so long, where finally you just have to be authentic and it kind of comes out in an erratic way that often shocks the people around you and creates quite a lot of turbulence in your life. I think if we had more education in our culture about how to make choices from a powerful place instead of from a place of needing almost to escape or to run away or from a place of panicked urgency, I think that a lot more people would be happy and finding that joy in their life and being at peace. So, again, that's what we're going into today. So, I do think that at some level, every single human being knows when their alignment is off and when they need to make changes. Whether spirit speaking, your intuition is speaking to you, or you just feel it in your core. Now, for me, when I was recognizing that I needed to make this choice to quit drinking, I could feel my alignment off in my chest. I could feel this weight that I knew the moment that I stepped into that choice, the weight would lift off of me. And it's very hard to describe in words what this feeling is. However, I think that a lot of you can relate to this. That feeling when you know that you've done something that is out of your character, when you know you've done something that is against what you believe in, when you are making choices or standing in a place that is inauthentic to who you are, you don't feel good about it. And I think that we can all relate to that experience. Now, I want to be clear that spirit will always guide you, and your alignment will always pull you to make choices for your greatest good. Okay. It's not going to pull you off course. It's not going to pull you to a place that is not for your greatest good. And that's why in these past episodes, I've gone into a lot of detail about distinguishing between your ego and the voice in your head and your alignment. Because if you listen to your ego, you're going to make choices based out of fear and separation, which will not lead you to your greatest good. It is going to lead you to a place where you're going to be very safe, but probably pretty unhappy. Versus your alignment will call you to make probably some choices that are a little scary, choices that will force you to grow and change, but will also allow you to step into the greatest calling in your life. That distinguishing, that ability to witness the voice in your head and choose your alignment instead of choosing the ego, which is always based in fear and separation, if you can get that down, if you can even just start on the path to recognizing that, you will absolutely live a different life. Now, I also want to be clear that your alignment will pull you to make choices for your greatest good overall. And these choices may feel really scary and challenging in the moment, right? So be aware of that. Just because you feel like you need to make changes to work in a job or career that you feel really called to doesn't mean that the choices you have to make along the way are going to be simple or easy or aren't going to challenge you in a lot of ways, right? It's way easier to stay where you are, to sit in your house and eat bonbons. And it would have been way easier for me in the short term to just continue things on the way that they had been going rather than me taking the time to really look at all of these things for me and move through that process of change. This can be applied to literally anything, whether we're looking to create a new career, we're looking to create a new relationship, like I talked about in the last 2 episodes, or we're even just looking to create some diet changes and a new, healthier lifestyle, right? Like I talked about in episode 9, where we talked about the first step to manifesting a new relationship in your life, some of the things that I asked you to do were certainly not easy or comfortable. In the moment, these choices won't necessarily feel easy or comfortable. However, they will be, if it's in your alignment, for the greatest good for you. Now, another way to describe this feeling is expansive versus restrictive. So, back in March, when I was going through my process of making this choice, and I imagined living without alcohol in my life, I immediately felt my energy expand. I felt light. I felt that weight move off of me. And I felt this sense of freedom. And this is another way to distinguish whether or not these choices that you're considering making are within your alignment or are not. When you think about making that choice, do you feel expansive? Do you feel a sense of freedom? Do you feel light? Do you feel excited? Or do you feel restrictive? Do you feel your energy contract? Do you feel heavy or weighted down? If you feel that way, whether you're choosing to start a new diet, you're starting a new career, you're starting a new relationship, if you feel your energy contract, most often it means that either number one, that choice is not within your alignment, or the way that you're going about that choice is not in your alignment, right? A really simple example to this is okay, so I hate going to the grocery store. I just don't like it. It is a pain in my butt. I don't enjoy going to the grocery store. I don't know what it is. I don't know why. It's just not my jam. However, here's the reality in our life. We have to purchase food so that we have something to eat at our homes, right? It is simply a reality of life. However, There are multiple ways for us to go about getting food from said grocery store to my home. And so we have these choices in our life where we just have to do them. It's not necessarily about, is this in my alignment? Is it in my alignment to go to the grocery store? Do I feel expansive about it? No, not really. I just simply don't like it. However, if I take a step back and reconsider, okay, this is something that needs to be done. I feel that sinking feeling in my chest. I don't really want to go to the grocery store and have to think about all the random things that I may have forgotten or listen in to the mom drag her kids around. So, how can I do this in a way that I would love? And that's what I want you to think about if you're in that situation where you have a choice that isn't really a choice, it just has to be done. How can I do this in a way that I would love? Oh, well, today I would really enjoy that experience if I drove the extra 5 minutes to go to this other grocery store rather than the one that I normally go to. Okay, awesome. I would really love to simply have an iced coffee while I walked around the grocery store shopping. Awesome. Hey, you know what? Today I am wiped out. I am going to order Instacart. That's awesome too. And either way, even though the activity itself, that choice to go to the grocery store isn't something that I love to do, I can create my engagement with it in a way that I will enjoy. Okay, so I did want to talk about that. There are things in our lives that we quote unquote choose to do, even though the reality is they're not necessarily choices unless we're choosing to just live a completely different lifestyle, go off the grid, live in the mountains without electricity somewhere, right? That is a choice. However, is that within my alignment? No, not really. So, how can I create this in a way that I would love? Here is another thing to keep in mind when you are considering making a choice or a big change in your life that you feel is in alignment with your calling, that you feel is in alignment with the path that you want to walk down. I've gotten asked this question in a lot of different ways, and usually I get asked this question in the context of life purpose or life goals, where someone will come to me and say, hey, you know, I think it's my calling to become a whatever it is. I think it's my calling to become a writer. I think it's my calling to start a podcast. I think I'm supposed to build orphanages in Africa. I think I'm supposed to travel to X country to serve these people, whatever it is. But I'm not completely sure. I'm not sure if that's what I'm called to do. And relating to this type of thing, I feel like I'm called to quit alcohol. I feel like I'm called to live a healthier lifestyle. I feel like I'm called to up-level my relationship, but I'm not sure. So here's your biggest hint. People who aren't called to do something don't wonder if they're called to do that thing. Okay? So, for example, I have always been called to be a writer. I've always been called to be a speaker. I've always been called to work with people. Those are things that have always been on my heart since I was a young kid. And for a long time, I wondered, I kind of feel like I'm called to do this, that I'm called to step into this path, but I'm not sure if it's right for me. I'm not sure if that's what I'm really supposed to do here. And a very wise woman in my life said to me, well, have you ever wondered if you're supposed to be an electrical engineer? I said, no. She said, okay, have you ever wondered if you're supposed to be an astronaut? No. Have you ever wondered if you're supposed to be a chef? No. So you aren't supposed to be any of those things. You aren't supposed to make any of the choices in your life to follow those paths. But if something is on your heart and pulling at you, that's what you're called to do. So I say that all to say that if you have things that are on your heart and have been pulling at you and calling at you, don't deny that. People who aren't called to make those choices or do those things, don't wonder about them. Me quitting alcohol was a critical piece of me stepping into my calling to starting the soul method and the work that I plan to do moving forward. Okay, so I need to be super clear here. Do I think that everyone needs to live a sober life? Do I think that everyone needs to live a sober life to accomplish their dreams? Absolutely not. Everyone's calling is different. And so the choices that you will be called to make along the way will also be different. Everyone is unique, and that's the beauty of this. And remember the second foundation of the soul method, that good and bad or right and wrong do not exist. I don't believe that alcohol is a bad thing. My personal belief on this is that alcohol is a revealer. It's a lot like money, guns, or tattoo machines for that matter. It will reveal the things that are in your heart. And I definitely don't believe that it is a part of everybody's path to not have that be a part of their life. I just know that that was what I was called to do. And I think that this is the place where we most often get caught up in making choices, is this place of judgment. When we make choices out of a place of judgment, out of a place of right or wrong, we wind up making that choice out of our ego, out of fear-based belief systems, and out of belief systems of separation, rather than out of our alignment, which is based in our intuition and a powerful place. So, have you guys ever had the experience of asking a friend for some advice or just needing to share about a challenging choice that you are considering making? And then your friend might say to you, well, what are the pros and what are the cons to making this choice? I think that's such BS, to be honest, as I always am. Pros and cons are based again in a right and wrong system. And the reality is that the choices that we make do not need to make sense to our ego. Okay, I'm going to say that again. The choices that we make that are in our alignment do not need to make sense to our ego. And to be frank, most often they won't. So, at a most basic level, we can break this down because our ego is constantly rationalizing all the things around us. We talked about this in episode 3, where it wants to make sense of everything that is going on in our lives. It talks and talks and talks in our own head with the purpose of keeping us safe, right? It will always continue to talk and talk, and it wants to keep us safe from the scary things that are going on around us, or the things that it sees as scary, which is basically everybody else on the planet. Now, when we are making choices, this looks like the rationalization of what we are going to do. So we think about making a choice, And then we think about all the reasons why we should or shouldn't make that choice. And then we think about, oh gosh, well, I'm going to have to explain this to everybody else around me. How can I explain this choice in a way that will make sense to everybody else so that they don't judge me? Has anybody else ever had this experience? But here's the thing. When we are making choices to pursue our calling and pursue our highest selves for the greatest good, the choices that we have to make that are on that path will most likely not make sense to our own ego or to the people around us. We see this all the time in movies, right? We see this where there's this guy who has the high paying job in New York. And on the surface, it looks like he has all the things, but underneath, he's miserable. And it makes no sense to his friends when he quits his job and moves to Timbuktu to pursue his love of manuscripts, right? We've all seen this in the movies, and internally, we cheer when other people do this on the big screen. We also hear about this in real life stories where people will either perform an act of heroism, people will make a daring claim, people will stand up to Big Brother. And often these choices do not make logical sense. They don't make rational sense to do that. They aren't the choices that keep us safe. However, if you talk to anybody who has made these choices, whether their choices are in the books of history or not, they will say that they were worth it. I mean, at a most basic level, think about the choice to have kids, right? Often that choice does not make logical sense. Kids will change your life. They will force you to look at some of the darkest places of your own being and deal with yourself if you're going to really show up for them as a parent. They will cost you a lot of money and a lot of energy and a lot of emotional expenditure. Logically, it doesn't make a ton of sense to give up our freedom, give up our time, our energy, our resources to have kids. But we do it every day. And if you talk to most parents, despite everything that they have had to go through to raise kids, would they ever make a different choice? No, they wouldn't. And I've said on this podcast before, I was one of those people who, most likely, if I had been in my aligned self, I wouldn't have had kids. However, would I ever go back and change my life so that I don't have the kids that I have today? Absolutely not. Being a mother has enabled me to grow and change in more ways than I could ever possibly imagine, and I love those little monkeys more than anything on the planet. I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be their mom. So I think it's incredibly important that we give ourselves permission for our choices to not make sense, and then stop trying to rationalize them to everybody else around us. There is a really great weekend that is done by Landmark Forum. Um, it is a 3-day program, and I don't agree with everything that they do there. Okay, I'm not promoting them. I don't get paid by them. However, one piece that they do on this topic I think is absolutely phenomenal, and I'm going to share it with you now. Because I think in our culture, we always get trapped in this judgment thing. And the example that they give in their weekend is chocolate vanilla. So I want you sitting at home or driving your car to imagine me holding up my hands and imagine that I have 2 ice cream cones, one in each hand. One is chocolate and one's vanilla. and I hold them out to you and I say, chocolate vanilla, choose. Now, which would you choose? Do you like chocolate more or vanilla more? So you choose chocolate vanilla. Let's say you choose chocolate. I say, awesome. Okay. Why did you choose chocolate? And then you're going to tell me a lot of things. You're going to tell me, well, I like the taste better. Well, I don't really like vanilla. Vanilla's boring. Everybody likes vanilla. Blah, 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 blah. Right? And then I would say, no, no, no. I'm taking the ice cream cone back. I have 2 ice cream cones. Chocolate, vanilla. Choose. You say, I choose chocolate. I say, okay, why did you choose chocolate? And we would go around and around in this for several rounds until we finally got to the place where, sometimes in a very exasperated voice, you might look at me and say, I choose chocolate because I just choose chocolate. And we would finally get there. When you make a choice, you make the choice because you make the choice, not because you need to defend, rationalize, or explain your choice to anybody else. At the end of the day, it's none of their business. And I really want to give you permission to make your choices this way. It doesn't mean you don't make choices without compassion for the people around you. And it doesn't mean you don't have the conversation with them about the choice that you are going to make. However, I want to take the pressure off of you where you feel the need to explain yourself to everybody else around you. Because here's the reality. If you feel the need to make everybody else in your life feel good about the choices that you're making, you know what that is, right? Yay, codependence. At the end of the day, the choices that you make only need to be in alignment for you. And if somebody else in your life doesn't understand or chooses to judge you based on that, number one, you don't need to fix it for them. And number two, their reactions are their own business. They need to emotionally deal with themselves. That's not your job. That's all to say that at the end of the day, if you are going to make authentic choices in your life, you will need to exit codependent relationships with the people around you. Because that is the reality. The choices that you make, the choices that I made, the choice that I made to quit drinking alcohol definitely did not make sense to other people. People didn't understand why. They asked me how long, but you can't party anymore, blah, 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 blah. And you know what? It was probably one of the most awesome moments in my relationship with Joe when I told him about this choice that I wanted to make. And he said, all right, cool. Literally, it wasn't even a conversation. He was just like, yeah, you do you. That's awesome. Now, does Joe still drink alcohol? Yes. Do I have a problem with that? Nope. Because again, I don't need him to do the same things that I do in order for me to feel secure in the choices that I make in my life. Now, if I genuinely was having a problem and I had a request of him, that would have been a different conversation. However, in this specific situation, I moved through the resistance to this choice on my own. And I've never really felt pulled to drink again. So we're going to go into this piece now because I think this is really where the rubber meets the road in making challenging choices, or at least choices that we feel are challenging. Because we feel called to make a choice, we feel called to step into our alignment, and the ego rears its ugly head, starts going on and on about all of the judgments and the fear, and we feel that resistance inside of us. Right? I felt a lot of fear come up for me when I considered making this choice. I was afraid of other people's reactions. I was afraid of judgment. Like I mentioned, there was a lot going on there, and my ego was going around and around in my head. Now, the worst thing that I could have done in that moment was to try to make this choice without dealing with the resistance. And I think this is where a lot of programs to help people make challenging choices like this, people who genuinely have a drinking problem or a drug problem, I think this is where sometimes things fall through the cracks. Because if you don't deal with the emotional resistance that comes up for you, you will always feel pulled to return to the negative item or the negative habit or the negative choices. I know that the reason that I have not felt challenged by this choice or felt pulled to drink again ever since I made that choice is because I completely dissolved that emotional resistance that came up for me. Now, how do we do this? And we're back to tapping, folks. So, I'm going to make a statement here that might be a bit inflammatory, but you guys know me. I always speak from the heart and speak the truth. I don't believe anybody has a drug problem or an alcohol problem or a substance problem, whether the substance is food, shopping. No one has a negative habit or a problem with a substance simply because of the thing, simply because of the alcohol, or simply because of the drug. I don't believe there's any drug out there in the world that somebody goes to and becomes addicted to simply because that drug is so addictive or simply because it's that enticing. I firmly believe that anybody who is enacting these behaviors or very committed to these lifestyles, committed to these habits that are negative, that underneath it always goes back to an emotional misalignment and always goes back to emotional trauma. And if we can get to the root, if we can peel the onion layers back and deal with the emotional trauma, deal with the fear, deal with the abuse that happened, deal with the PTSD, deal with all of the things that happened at an emotional level, at that deep core level of our belief systems, naturally, the negative habits, the negative addictions, and the commitment to that negative lifestyle will fall away gracefully and with ease and on its own. I 100% believe that. And again, I know that's something to say that people might have a bit of reaction to, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you and dig into that deeper. Because I really do believe that when people do have a problem with alcohol or a substance or a habit and they go into a rehabilitation program and they come out the other end and then they go back to the negative habit, I really do believe that it's because at some level they didn't dissolve the resistance. So, how do you do that? Like I said, back to either tapping or another modality of therapeutic technique that connects with that emotional part of our brain. So when I was doing this, I had all of this fear come up for me, all of the noise in my ego, and I went into my tapping process to dissolve that resistance. And the moment that I did that, the moment I got rid of the fear, the moment I got rid of the judgment and the right and wrong and all of that junk was the moment I was free to make this choice with grace and ease. And honestly, that's how you do it. That's how you can make choices in your life, whether you're feeling like you need to go to the gym more, whether you're too feeling like you need a break from alcohol, whether you're feeling like you need to end a relationship or end a career so you can start something new. You want to change jobs. You want to start a passion. You want to learn something new. any of these shifts or changes that we make that we at first have this resistance to out of fear, if we get down to it and we dissolve that fear, we then can make that choice with grace and ease. Now, again, am I saying that you dissolve your anxiety about going to the gym? Does that mean that you're not going to sometimes feel a little tired when you go to the gym? No, not at all. Sometimes you're going to feel tired. However, feeling tired is very different than the emotional triggered response of extreme fear or extreme resistance. And that's what the tapping or the other modality that connects to that emotional part of the brain will dissolve for you. Now, this goes into multi levels, right? A lot of times when we need to make choices like this, it's going to affect not just us, but also the relationships with other people around us. And at every level, we might have to do some tapping or some emotional therapy around that. And that's okay. I want you to give yourself permission not to rush through the process, but instead to really dive into those places and bring the light into the darkness. Honestly, what I found is that most of the time, the fears that seem so big and so terrifying dissolve within minutes because the reality is that they're not real. So, as we bring this episode to a close, of course, I would love to hear from you. What are your biggest takeaways? How are you feeling? Are there choices in your life that you are wanting to make right now? Choices that you're pulled to make to step into your alignment, to step into your authenticity? Or do you feel spirit calling you to make some changes? What are they? How can I support you? As always, I am here for you. If you want to contact me, you can reach out on the Soul Method Facebook page, which is at the Soul Method Yoga, or shoot me an email, which is Joelle, Joelle, at thesoulmethod.com. I hope you all have an amazing holiday weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Until next time.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.